Chosen one, the moment you heard that the hard season is over, something inside you did not immediately celebrate. Instead, your shoulders tightened. Your breathing shifted. A quiet voice within you whispered, "Be careful." After everything you have endured, hope does not feel like a gift. It feels like a risk. You have survived too many cycles of disappointment to casually believe that relief has truly arrived. Your spirit wants to exhale, but your mind has been trained to scan the horizon for smoke. This guarded response is not weakness. It is the reflex of someone who has lived too long in battle. When warfare stretches across months and years, hope starts to feel suspicious. You learn to protect yourself from emotional whiplash. You learn not to celebrate too early. You learned that lowering your guard once cost you dearly. So now, even as peace approaches, your instincts remain armed. Yet what you are experiencing is not proof that the war continues. It is proof that your nervous system has not yet caught up to the victory your spirit already secured. Phantom pain lingers even after the wound has closed. Soldiers have reported feeling sensations in limbs that are no longer injured. The body remembers what the present moment no longer contains. In the same way, your soul has stepped into peacetime, but your biology is still echoing the alarms of yesterday. You are bracing for impact that is no longer scheduled to arrive. You are rehearsing disaster in a season that has already shifted. The battlefield is quiet, but inside your chest, the drums still pound. This is not a sign that you lack faith. It is a sign that you have been strong for a very long time. And now comes the truth that must anchor you. Heaven has closed the case on your suffering. This is not poetic exaggeration. This is a legal declaration in the realm of the spirit. The season of testing that shaped you, refined you, and stretched you to your absolute limit has reached its appointed conclusion. What was permitted for growth is no longer authorized for continuation. The decree has been issued. The wilderness has fulfilled its assignment. The storms that taught you endurance are not meant to define your permanent climate. Yet here is the hidden danger that few speak about. When survival becomes your identity, peace can feel like a threat. You learned how to function in crisis. You became sharp, alert, resilient. Your reflexes kept you alive. But if you continue to operate as though war is still active, you risk sabotaging the very blessing that has arrived. You might reject good news because it feels too fragile. You might push away healthy relationships because chaos feels more familiar than calm. You might downplay open doors because expecting loss feels safer than embracing gain. Self-sabotage does not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like overprotection. Sometimes it looks like refusing to trust joy. If you cling to survival mode after heaven has declared victory, you will unknowingly prolong a season that has already ended. That is why this moment matters. You are not just being told that the hard season is over. You are being given a blueprint for transition. This is both spiritual and biological. Spiritually, you must realign your belief with heaven's decree. Biologically, you must allow your nervous system to recalibrate from high alert to holy rest. The transition from warrior to ruler requires more than encouragement. It requires understanding. You need to know why your body reacts the way it does. You need to know why peace feels unfamiliar. You need to know how to shift from guarding to governing without losing your strength. The same God who walked you through the fire is now guiding you into stability. The same power that sustained you in crisis is now inviting you into restoration. This is not the end of your story. It is the end of a chapter. And you are not being dismissed from the battlefield empty-handed. You are being discharged with authority, wisdom, and the capacity to steward what is coming next. Heaven has closed the case. Now you must learn how to live like it. Now that you understand that heaven has closed the case on your suffering, we must step directly into what is actually happening inside your mind. Because what you are facing is not another open battle, but the phantom war that often begins after the visible victory has already been secured. When the enemy realizes that direct attacks can no longer destabilize your finances, break your body, or block your destiny, the strategy shifts. The battlefield does not disappear, it simply relocates. Instead of confronting you with obvious chaos, the attack becomes psychological. Instead of fire raining from the sky, it becomes whispers in your thoughts. Instead of doors slamming shut, it becomes suspicion about doors that are opening. This shift is subtle, and that is precisely why it is dangerous. Direct warfare makes you alert and prayerful. Psychological warfare makes you doubt yourself. The enemy understands that he no longer has legal ground to destroy you externally, so he attempts to convince you to self-destruct internally. If he can no longer wound your circumstances, he will attempt to wound your perception. And perception, if left unexamined, becomes the lens through which you interpret every blessing as a potential threat. This is why silence now feels louder than chaos once did. You prayed for peace, you begged for stability, you asked for the storm to cease, and now that it has something inside you feels uneasy. The absence of crisis has become disorienting. Your nervous system, conditioned by months or years of survival mode, does not immediately recognize safety. Instead of relief, you feel restlessness. Instead of gratitude, you feel suspicion. You wake up in the morning and everything is calm, yet your body is bracing as if an alarm is about to sound. That is the residue of prolonged warfare. Your biology adapted to constant stress. Your brain learned to scan for danger because danger was consistently present. But now the environment has changed, and your internal system has not yet recalibrated. Silence feels like the quiet before an explosion. Peace feels like a setup. You are waiting for the other shoe to drop, not because evidence suggests it will, but because history trained you to expect it. And so normal situations begin to feel like hidden traps. A simple email notification tightens your chest. A delayed text message spirals into imagined betrayal. A new opportunity triggers thoughts of potential humiliation. Your mind begins constructing worst-case scenarios with impressive speed. You rehearse conversations that have not happened. You defend yourself against accusations that have not been spoken. You create exit strategies for relationships that have not harmed you. What once would have been interpreted as neutral or even positive now feels suspicious. This is the essence of phantom warfare. The threat is not present, but the anticipation of threat is. And anticipation, when fed long enough, can be just as exhausting as actual conflict. You are not fighting enemies anymore. You are fighting memories. You are not responding to danger. You are responding to echoes. The tragedy of this illusion is that it can cause you to misinterpret seasons of calm as seasons of vulnerability. Instead of settling into peace, you begin fortifying yourself against imagined disasters. Instead of celebrating stability, you prepare for collapse. You tell yourself it is wisdom. You tell yourself it is maturity. But there is a difference between discernment and hypervigilance. Discernment is guided by clarity. Hypervigilance is driven by trauma. Discernment responds to evidence. Hypervigilance reacts to memory. And if you do not consciously recognize the difference, you may sabotage the very peace you prayed for, because remaining tense feels safer than relaxing into trust. Expecting disaster in seasons of calm is a learned reflex, not a prophetic insight. It is important that you hear this clearly. Just because your body feels anxious does not mean danger is present. Just because your mind imagines collapse does not mean collapse is scheduled. Your nervous system is attempting to protect you based on outdated data. It is operating from yesterday's battlefield, while heaven is operating from today's decree. This mismatch creates internal conflict. Your spirit senses elevation, your body senses threat. Your faith declares promotion. Your reflexes declare caution. And in this tension, the phantom war attempts to convince you that something must be wrong because nothing is wrong. But this is the illusion of peacetime danger. It is the belief that calm is suspicious, that joy is temporary, that blessing is fragile. The illusion whispers that if you relax, you will lose everything. It suggests that constant alertness is the price of survival. Yet what kept you alive in war will imprison you in peace if you refuse to release it. You must understand that the enemy's new strategy is not to overpower you, but to exhaust you. If he can keep you in a loop of mental rehearsals, defensive posturing, and emotional withdrawal, you will never fully inhabit the season that has already been granted to you. You will stand at the threshold of your promised land, scanning for enemies that have already retreated. You will interpret divine stillness as spiritual absence. You will mistake healing for vulnerability. And in doing so, you risk rejecting the harvest because your hands are still positioned for battle. The truth is this: the war you are feeling right now is not an active campaign against your destiny. It is the detox process of a nervous system learning how to exist without constant threat. It is the unwinding of tightly coiled reflexes. It is the recalibration of perception. The battlefield radio is still buzzing, even though the transmission has ended. And until you consciously choose to update your internal narrative, you will continue to live as though the sirens are about to sound. But here is the empowering revelation: illusions lose power when exposed. Once you recognize that the anxiety rising in calm moments is a phantom response, you reclaim authority over it. You stop automatically believing every catastrophic thought. You begin questioning the urgency of your fears. You pause before reacting. You breathe before defending. You observe instead of spiraling. And in that pause, you create space for truth to anchor you. The calm you are experiencing is not a trap. It is an invitation. It is not the prelude to destruction. It is the foundation for construction. You are not being lured into vulnerability. You are being ushered into stability. The illusion of peacetime danger dissolves the moment you align your perception with heaven's decree. The case has been closed. The season has shifted. The external war has ended. What remains is the internal transition. And transitions require patience. They require awareness. They require the courage to sit in silence without interpreting it as threat. This is where maturity deepens. This is where sovereignty begins. Not in defeating visible enemies, but in mastering internal narratives. You do not need to brace for impact anymore. You do not need to rehearse disaster. You do not need to interpret every blessing as temporary. The phantom war after the victory only persists if you continue fighting it. Lay down the mental armor. Let your nervous system learn the language of safety. Allow peace to feel unfamiliar without labeling it dangerous. Because the greatest sign that the war has truly ended is not the absence of enemies outside of you, but the absence of enemies within your own mind. Now that you can recognize the phantom war playing out in your thoughts, we must go deeper into what is actually happening beneath those thoughts, because what you are experiencing is not merely emotional fragility, but what Scripture itself describes with striking precision as mahala, the biological hangover of prolonged warfare. When Proverbs 13:12 declares that hope deferred makes the heart sick, most readers interpret that word sick as simple disappointment or discouragement. But the original Hebrew term used there is mahala, and mahala does not describe a fleeting mood or passing sadness. It carries the weight of physical illness, bodily affliction, something that penetrates beyond the surface of emotion and settles into the tissues of the human frame. Scripture is not romantic about suffering. It does not reduce deferred hope to poetic melancholy. It acknowledges that prolonged waiting, extended uncertainty, and repeated postponement of breakthrough produce measurable strain in the body. God, in His wisdom, encoded within that single word a biological reality that modern neuroscience is only beginning to articulate. When hope is stretched over years without resolution, the nervous system adapts to survival. When prayers are delayed again and again, the body learns to brace. When promises seem postponed indefinitely, cortisol becomes a constant companion. And when that state becomes chronic, it leaves residue. This is mahala. It is not weakness. It is not lack of faith. It is the physiological cost of enduring what would have broken others. You remained spiritually loyal while your biology absorbed the shock waves. You kept praying while your adrenal system ran overtime. You kept believing while your body quietly entered high alert. And now that the external crisis has ended, the internal system is still recovering. Hope deferred was not just an emotional ache. It was a sustained stress response. Each disappointment trained your brain to anticipate the next one. Each closed door reinforced vigilance. Each financial strain or relational betrayal signaled to your nervous system that stability was unsafe. The brain, designed to protect you, strengthened neural pathways that favored caution over celebration. Over time, those pathways became automatic. Your body did not differentiate between spiritual testing and physical threat. It simply responded to repeated pressure by activating the same mechanisms that would activate in literal danger. Elevated heart rate, tightened muscles, shallow breathing, hyper-awareness. These responses are not signs of spiritual failure. They are survival adaptations. But survival adaptations, when left unaddressed after the threat is gone, become internal prisons. This is how prolonged stress wounds the nervous system. It is not a dramatic explosion. It is erosion. Day after day of uncertainty subtly conditions your baseline. What once would have been minor stress now feels overwhelming. What once would have felt safe now feels fragile. Your nervous system has been calibrated to expect disruption. And when that calibration persists into peacetime, it creates a dissonance between your spiritual reality and your biological state. Spiritually, you are confident that God has been faithful. Biologically, your body is still scanning for danger. Spiritually, you declare that the hard season is over. Biologically, your chest tightens at the slightest unpredictability. This tension does not invalidate your faith. It reveals the depth of what you survived. There is a difference between spiritual faithfulness and biological exhaustion. Faithfulness is the decision to trust God despite circumstances. Exhaustion is the physical toll of enduring those circumstances. You can be faithful and fatigued at the same time. You can believe deeply while your body trembles. You can worship sincerely while your nervous system is depleted. The prophet Elijah provides a powerful illustration of this dynamic. After calling down fire from heaven, he did not lose his faith when he fled into the wilderness. He was biologically depleted. His spiritual authority remained intact, but his nervous system was overwhelmed. God did not rebuke him for weakness. God restored him physically before speaking to him spiritually. That sequence is instructive. Before revelation, there was rest. Before instruction, there was nourishment. God acknowledged the body as part of the healing process. In the same way, you must understand that wilderness hangover is a real condition. It is the after effect of living too long in emergency mode. It is the tremor that remains after the earthquake has passed. It is the residual adrenaline that has not yet dissipated. It is the difficulty sleeping even when there is no crisis. It is the skepticism toward good news. It is the subtle belief that joy must be temporary. Wilderness hangover does not mean you failed the test. It means you endured it. But endurance leaves marks. Your nervous system was not designed for indefinite stress. It was designed for acute response followed by recovery. When recovery is delayed for months or years, the system forgets how to downshift. The body becomes accustomed to tension. Muscles remain subtly contracted. Thoughts remain slightly guarded. Even breathing patterns reflect caution. This is why peace can initially feel uncomfortable. Your biology has not practiced it recently. Just as a muscle that has been clenched for too long aches when it finally relaxes, your nervous system may resist stillness because it has equated tension with preparedness. But preparedness for what the war that heaven has already declared finished. The threat that no longer has legal authority over your life. Recognizing Mahala is not about diagnosing yourself with fragility. It is about honoring the magnitude of what you carried. It is about acknowledging that survival mode was necessary for a season, but is no longer required. It is about understanding that the symptoms you experience now are echoes, not evidence of current danger. The wilderness shaped your character, but it also taxed your body. And just as a runner needs recovery after a marathon, your nervous system needs recalibration after prolonged spiritual warfare. The beauty of this realization is that it removes shame. You are not overreacting. You are recalibrating. You are not lacking trust. You are unwinding conditioning. You are not spiritually deficient. You are biologically healing. Once you understand that wilderness hangover is real, you stop judging yourself for feeling anxious in calm seasons. You stop interpreting physical symptoms as prophetic warnings. You begin distinguishing between intuition and trauma response. Intuition is calm and clear. Trauma response is urgent and reactive. Intuition guides gently. Trauma response demands immediate action. When you learn this difference, you reclaim authority over your reactions. You can pause when anxiety rises instead of obeying it blindly. You can remind your body that the environment has changed. You can breathe deeply and signal safety to your nervous system. You can allow hope to return without labeling it naive. Hope deferred once made your heart sick, but hope fulfilled will become, as Proverbs declares, a tree of life. That tree does not sprout overnight. It grows as your system relearns safety. It grows as your breathing steadies. It grows as your sleep deepens. It grows as your mind stops rehearsing disaster. Mahala is not permanent. It is transitional. It is the residue of battle, not the prediction of future war. And as you move forward, you must treat yourself with the same compassion that God demonstrated toward Elijah. Nourish your body. Rest deliberately. Refuse to shame your nervous system for trying to protect you. Thank it for carrying you through the wilderness and then gently guide it into peace. The biological hangover of warfare is real, but it is not your identity. It is evidence that you survived something significant. And survival was never the final goal. Thriving is. The wilderness trained you to endure. This new season will teach you to restore. And restoration begins with understanding that what you feel is not a lack of faith, but the echo of a long battle finally coming to an end. Having understood that what you have been carrying is not weakness, but the biological residue of prolonged warfare, we now arrive at a revelation that may unsettle you more than anything else you have heard so far, because endurance, as powerful and admirable as it was never the final test. Endurance was only the prerequisite. The wilderness demanded that you survive. It required resilience, grit, faith under pressure, and the ability to keep moving when everything in you wanted to collapse. You learned how to take a hit without losing your loyalty. You learned how to worship with tears in your eyes. You learned how to endure isolation without cursing heaven. That was the first examination, and you passed it. But endurance was preparation, not promotion. Surviving the desert was not the destination. It was the training ground. Now you are standing before a different examination, one that is quieter but far more complex, because it requires you to surrender the very instincts that kept you alive. The harder test is laying down hypervigilance. In war, hypervigilance is wisdom. In war, scanning the horizon protects you. In war, assuming threat keeps you prepared. But in peace, hypervigilance becomes self-sabotage. It prevents intimacy. It blocks joy. It turns blessings into potential threats. And here is the paradox. The same vigilance that once saved you will now sabotage you if you refuse to release it. Laying down hypervigilance does not mean becoming careless. It means updating your posture to match your season. You are no longer required to live with clenched fists. You are no longer assigned to brace for impact. The fight you trained for has concluded. But your muscles are still tight. Your thoughts are still guarded. Your reflexes still anticipate betrayal. And so the real test is not whether you can endure another storm. It is whether you can relax when the sky is clear. That is more difficult than surviving adversity, because adversity at least justifies tension. Peace exposes your internal habits. Peace reveals whether you trust God more than you trust your own defense mechanisms. This is where the question becomes deeply personal. Do you trust divine protection more than you trust personal defense during the hard season? Your discipline, your alertness, your boundaries, your caution all became shields. You felt safe because you were in control of your vigilance. You monitored everything. You anticipated every possibility. You tried to outthink potential harm. But now heaven is inviting you into a different posture, one that requires trust at a deeper level. Trusting divine protection means accepting that you do not have to preempt every problem. It means believing that if a challenge arises, you will have grace for it in the moment, rather than anxiety about it in advance. It means acknowledging that you are not the ultimate guardian of your destiny. God is. This shift is terrifying because it requires releasing the illusion of control. Hypervigilance feels empowering because it creates the sensation of preparedness. But preparedness rooted in fear is still fear, and fear, even when disguised as wisdom, keeps you in survival mode. Trust, on the other hand, feels vulnerable. It requires openness. It requires allowing good things to unfold without rehearsing their collapse. It requires sleeping without mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios. It requires receiving love without pre-writing the ending. That level of trust is not naive. It is mature. It is the posture of someone who understands that constant guarding is not the same as strength. Strength is the ability to remain open without being reckless. And here is where the identity crisis surfaces. If you are no longer a warrior, who are you? For years, you defined yourself by your resilience. You were the one who survived. You were the one who endured. You were the one who did not break. You wore that identity with quiet pride, and rightly so. But now that the war is over, the warrior identity feels disoriented. If there is no enemy to fight, what is your role? If there is no crisis to manage, where does your intensity go? If there is no battlefield, who are you without armor? This is the silent tension many chosen ones face. They know how to fight. They know how to persevere. They know how to stand firm under pressure. but they do not know how to inhabit peace without feeling restless. Peace feels unproductive. Calm feels unfamiliar. Stability feels almost boring compared to the adrenaline of survival. Yet the promotion you prayed for requires this new identity. You are not being demoted by laying down your sword. You are being upgraded. The warrior fights in the mud. The sovereign governs from authority. The warrior reacts to threats. The sovereign establishes order. The warrior survives battles. The sovereign builds legacy. And you cannot build legacy while constantly scanning for attack. You cannot design architecture for the future while gripping a weapon from the past. This is why you cannot hold a throne while gripping a sword. The throne represents stability, authority, and governance. The sword represents conflict and defense. Both have their place, but not at the same time. If your hands are occupied with past warfare, they are unavailable for present stewardship. Imagine trying to sit on a throne while bracing for combat. Your posture would be tense. Your vision would be narrow. Your focus would be reactive. You would be ruling from fear rather than wisdom. But when you release the sword, your hands become free to build, to bless, to create, to receive. The act of laying it down is not weakness. It is alignment. It is the visible sign that you trust the season has changed. And this surrender is not a one-time emotional moment. It is a daily decision. Each time anxiety rises in a peaceful environment, you must choose whether to grip the sword again or let it remain on the ground. Each time good news arrives, you must decide whether to interrogate it or receive it. Each time someone offers support, you must decide whether to suspect them or allow connection. These micro-decisions form the foundation of your new identity. You are transitioning from reactive strength to rooted authority. Rooted authority does not flinch at every shadow. It does not need constant proof of safety. It rests in the assurance that divine protection is active even when you are not actively defending yourself. This is the maturity that follows endurance. Endurance proved your loyalty. Surrender will prove your trust. Endurance required grit. Surrender requires faith. And faith at this level is not about believing God can carry you through hardship. It is about believing God can sustain you in blessing. It is about believing you are allowed to experience stability without it being revoked. It is about accepting that peace is not a temporary loophole, but a legitimate assignment. You trained for survival, but you were called for stewardship. The wilderness refined your character so that you would not abuse authority when it arrived. Now authority is here in the form of stability, opportunity, and peace. And the final exam is, this will you continue to live like a soldier when you have been crowned as a ruler? The answer determines whether you fully inhabit the new season or linger at its threshold. Lay down the hypervigilance. Release the identity that no longer serves this chapter. Trust that the God who carried you through war can guard you in peace. And allow your hands to open not to fight, but to govern, to build, and to receive what has already been decreed. Now that you understand that surrendering survival is the true promotion, we must examine the internal mechanics that make this transition feel so difficult. Because beneath the language of faith and warfare, there is a neurological reality taking place. And that reality can be described as a frequency mismatch between where your brain has been operating and where heaven is attempting to lead you. Survival mode quite literally locks the brain into what neuroscience calls beta frequency. Beta waves dominate when you are alert, analyzing, scanning for threats, planning contingencies, and bracing for impact. In moderate amounts, beta is useful. It helps you focus, solve problems, and respond quickly. But when beta becomes chronic and elevated for months or years, it becomes the soundtrack of survival. The brain remains on high alert, even when external danger subsides. The nervous system continues producing stress hormones. Muscles remain subtly tense. Breathing patterns stay shallow. The mind moves rapidly, jumping from scenario to scenario, calculating risks, anticipating loss. This is what prolonged warfare does. It trains your biology to live in vigilance. And the longer you live in that state, the more natural it feels. Calm begins to feel foreign. Stillness feels unsafe. Silence feels suspicious. You may have prayed your way through the wilderness, but your brain adapted to the pressure. And now that the external storm has passed, the internal frequency is still broadcasting, as though the war continues. This is why peace can feel inaccessible even when it is present. It is not because peace is absent. It is because your receiver is tuned to a different bandwidth. Heaven does not operate primarily on the frequency of frantic beta. Heaven broadcasts on deeper, slower, more expansive wavelengths, often described as theta and gamma. Theta is associated with creativity, intuition, healing, and deep internal integration. It is the state in which the subconscious becomes accessible and insight flows without force. Gamma, even higher in coherence, is linked to heightened awareness, compassion, and unified perception. These frequencies are not mystical abstractions. They are measurable brain states associated with calm clarity and profound insight. When Scripture speaks of the still small voice, it is describing a communication that does not compete with chaos. It does not shout over adrenaline. It whispers in environments of stillness. Divine downloads, guidance, creative solutions, and strategic clarity land most easily when the nervous system is regulated. You cannot hear a whisper in the middle of sirens. You cannot perceive subtle instruction while your mind is racing to defend against imagined threats. This is why divine downloads cannot land in a stressed mind. The issue is not that God is silent. The issue is that your internal frequency is too noisy to detect the transmission. Think of it like trying to tune an old radio. If the dial is stuck between stations, all you hear is static. The broadcast exists, but the receiver is misaligned. Chronic stress produces that static. The body is preparing for survival, not revelation. The mind is scanning for danger, not receiving strategy. When you remain in beta dominance, every thought becomes filtered through urgency. You interpret neutral events as potential threats. You interpret opportunities as risks. You interpret silence as foreboding. But when the brain shifts into theta, perception changes. You become less reactive and more reflective. You pause before responding. You sense rather than assume. You receive rather than chase. This shift is not passive. It is powerful. And Scripture offers a vivid illustration of this dynamic through the story of Elijah after Mount Carmel. Elijah had just experienced one of the most dramatic spiritual victories in biblical history. Fire fell from heaven at his command. False prophets were defeated. The drought was ending. If anyone had reason to feel triumphant and secure, it was Elijah. Yet immediately after that public victory, a single threatening message from Jezebel sent him running into the wilderness. He collapsed under the weight of despair and asked God to take his life. How could a prophet who called down fire be undone by a message? The answer lies not in spiritual weakness, but in biological depletion. Elijah had been operating in intense stress. He had confronted opposition publicly. He had stood alone before hundreds. He had lived in scarcity during the drought. His nervous system had been in sustained beta activation. When the threat came, even though he had just witnessed divine power, his biology overrode his theology. His body responded as though annihilation was imminent. That collapse was not a failure of faith. It was nervous system exhaustion. And notice how God responds. God does not rebuke Elijah for fear. He does not lecture him about courage. He does not demand immediate repentance. Instead, God sends an angel to provide food and rest. Elijah is instructed to eat and sleep, twice. Before God speaks the still small voice on the mountain, he restores Elijah physically. This sequence is profound. Before revelation, restoration. Before instruction, nourishment. Before mission, recalibration. God understood that spiritual clarity requires biological stability. Elijah could not hear the whisper while his nervous system was overloaded. He needed a frequency reset. In your own life, the same principle applies. If you attempt to operate in divine strategy while your body is still braced for war, you will misinterpret signals. You will assume threat where there is none. You will sabotage openings because they feel overwhelming. You will confuse trauma response with discernment. But when you allow your nervous system to downshift from chronic beta toward regulated theta, perception shifts. Breathing deepens, muscles release, thoughts slow, creativity returns. Joy becomes accessible, intuition becomes clearer. This is not merely psychological, it is physiological, and it is deeply spiritual, because your body is not separate from your calling. It is the vessel through which you execute it. A regulated nervous system does not mean you will never face challenges again. It means you will face them from grounded authority rather than reactive panic. It means you will respond rather than overreact. It means you will hear guidance without distortion. The frequency reset is therefore not optional. It is foundational. Just as a musician must tune an instrument before playing a symphony, you must allow your internal system to retune before stepping into your next assignment. The wilderness required intensity. The promised land requires coherence. The battle demanded adrenaline. Governance requires alignment. This is why practices that regulate the nervous system are not luxuries. They are spiritual strategies. Deep breathing, rest. Silence, healthy rhythms, time in nature, intentional stillness. These are not signs of laziness. They are frequency adjustments. They are ways of signaling safety to your body so that your spirit can operate freely. When your breathing slows, your heart rate stabilizes. When your heart rate stabilizes, cortisol decreases. When cortisol decreases, perception clears. And when perception clears, you can finally distinguish between real intuition and phantom fear. The same God who sent an angel to feed Elijah understands your biology. He is not asking you to override your nervous system with sheer willpower. He is inviting you to cooperate with healing. The frequency reset from beta to theta is not mystical escapism. It is integrated restoration. It is allowing your body to align with the decree heaven has already issued. The war is over. Now your system must learn it. As you move forward, remember this: you are not broken because you feel anxious in peace. You are recalibrating. Your brain adapted to survive. Now it must adapt to thrive. And thriving requires a different frequency. When you allow that shift to occur, you will discover that the still small voice has been there all along. The static was internal, not external. Tune the receiver, breathe deeply, rest intentionally, and watch how clarity returns when your nervous system finally realizes that the battlefield has gone quiet for good. Having seen that a frequency reset is necessary if you are to move from survival into sovereignty, we now step into a practical and profound truth. Every era is given tools that match its challenges, and what once required years of isolation in caves and deserts can now be accessed through sacred tools designed for a modern, overstimulated world. Ancient prophets understood intuitively what neuroscience now measures scientifically. They knew that clarity came in stillness. They withdrew from crowds. They fasted. They meditated on the law day and night. They ascended mountains alone. They entered caves not because solitude was glamorous, but because solitude lowered the noise. In isolation, the nervous system slowed. In silence, the mind softened. In rhythmic prayer and breath, their internal frequency shifted naturally from agitation to receptivity. What we now call theta states they experienced through extended communion and contemplation. Moses met God on a mountain away from the chaos of the camp. Elijah heard the whisper, not in the earthquake or the fire, but in the gentle stillness after retreat. Even Yeshua repeatedly withdrew from the multitudes to pray in solitary places. These were not random habits. They were intentional frequency resets. In stillness, their bodies regulated. In regulation, their perception sharpened. In sharpened perception, revelation flowed. But here's the challenge for you today: you do not live in the wilderness. You live in an age of relentless stimulation. Notifications interrupt your thoughts. Screens glow late into the night. News cycles spin continuously. Social media algorithms compete for your attention. Your nervous system rarely experiences true silence. Even when external conflict subsides, digital noise keeps the brain in mild beta activation. Overstimulation has become normal. Distraction has become ambient. And when the mind is constantly processing input, it struggles to descend into the slower receptive states where divine peace anchors. Modern overstimulation is not merely an inconvenience. It is a neurological barrier. Every alert, every scrolling session, every abrupt sound spike subtly reinforces alertness. Your brain remains slightly vigilant, even when you are physically safe. This does not make you weak. It makes you human in a hyper-connected era. But if you attempt to receive profound peace while remaining immersed in constant input, you will find it elusive. The nervous system needs intentional cues of safety and rhythm to shift from survival to restoration. This is where sound frequency becomes more than background noise and transforms into a deliberate tool for neural recalibration. Sound has always carried spiritual significance. Before written scripture, there were chants, psalms, and instruments. The walls of Jericho fell to sound. David's harp soothed Saul's tormented spirit. The Psalms were sung long before they were studied. Sound bypasses intellectual defenses and speaks directly to the nervous system. It influences heart rate, breathing patterns, and neural oscillations. Modern research confirms what ancient mystics practiced: certain rhythmic frequencies can gently guide the brain from high-alert beta states into slower, more coherent patterns associated with relaxation and integration. When specific tones are repeated in measured cadence, the brain begins to entrain to that rhythm. Heart rate steadies, muscles release, breathing deepens. The body receives a message of safety. This is not mysticism divorced from faith. It is the Creator's design embedded within your biology. Sacred technology, therefore, is not a replacement for prayer. It is a bridge between biology and spirit. It acknowledges that you are not a disembodied soul floating above physiology. You are a spirit inhabiting a nervous system. When that nervous system is dysregulated, your spiritual perception feels clouded. When it is regulated, your spiritual awareness feels accessible. Sacred technology simply leverages natural laws to support spiritual alignment. It does not generate peace. It facilitates your capacity to receive it. Imagine attempting to pour clean water into a cup that is constantly shaking. The water spills not because it is absent, but because the container is unstable. Sound frequency tools act like steady hands holding the cup still. They calm the tremor long enough for peace to settle. This is especially vital for those who have endured prolonged warfare. Your system has been conditioned to expect threat. It needs repeated experiences of safe rhythm to rewrite that expectation. Listening to calming, structured sound for even a few minutes daily signals to your brain that you are not in immediate danger. Neural pathways begin to reorganize. Stress hormones decrease incrementally. The static that once filled your mental atmosphere starts to thin, and as the static clears, something remarkable happens. You begin to sense divine peace not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible internal state. You feel your shoulders drop without forcing them. You notice your thoughts slowing. You realize that you are not rehearsing disaster. This is not escapism. It is restoration. It is giving your nervous system consistent cues that the war has ended. Over time, these cues accumulate. The brain learns that calm is not a prelude to catastrophe. It learns that silence does not equal threat. It learns that stillness can be trusted. And once that learning solidifies, you no longer need to fight for peace. You inhabit it. Clearing mental static, therefore, is not about emptying your mind artificially. It is about reducing unnecessary noise so that what is already true becomes audible. The still, small voice does not shout over anxiety. It rests beneath it. When static dominates you, interpret every sensation through tension. When static fades, discernment sharpens. You can distinguish between intuition and trauma. You can receive guidance without forcing it. You can sense joy without bracing for loss. Sacred tools in a modern era are not signs that faith has weakened. They are signs that grace adapts. Just as ancient prophets used caves and mountains to shift frequency, you may use intentional sound and structured rhythm to achieve similar regulation. The principle is the same. Lower noise, increase coherence, invite alignment. This does not diminish your dependence on God. It deepens it by honoring the vessel He gave you. When you participate in recalibration, you are not taking control away from heaven. You are cooperating with heaven's design. The battlefield demanded intensity. The new season requires harmony. Harmony is not passive. It is powerful. It allows you to respond from clarity rather than reflex. It allows you to build rather than brace. It allows you to govern rather than react. And as you consistently clear mental static, you will notice that divine peace does not feel foreign anymore. It feels natural. It feels sustainable. It feels like home. That is the purpose of sacred tools in this era. Not to create something artificial, but to remove what is unnecessary. Not to manufacture revelation, but to make space for it. The wilderness trained you to endure chaos. The new season invites you to cultivate coherence. And coherence begins when you intentionally quiet the noise long enough to hear the whisper that has been waiting patiently beneath it all. As your nervous system begins to recalibrate and the static slowly thins, you will encounter a quieter but deeper confrontation. One that has nothing to do with external enemies and everything to do with identity. Because the transition from warrior to sovereign is not merely behavioral, it is existential. For years, struggle shaped who you believed yourself to be. You were the resilient one, the strong one, the one who endured what others could not. You built your self-understanding around survival. Every scar became evidence of strength. Every disappointment became proof of endurance. You learned how to function under pressure so effectively that pressure felt normal. And now that the pressure is easing, something inside you feels disoriented. Fear of peace emerges not because peace is dangerous, but because peace destabilizes the identity you mastered. In struggle, you knew your role. You were fighting, praying, pushing, surviving. In peace, you must define yourself differently. There is no immediate crisis to manage, no urgent fire to extinguish. And without the familiar tension, you may feel strangely untethered. This is the silent anxiety of promotion. You prayed for relief, yet, when relief arrives, it exposes how deeply struggle shaped you. If you are no longer battling, who are you? If you are no longer defending what is your posture, the mind that has equated intensity with purpose can misinterpret calm as stagnation. But calm is not stagnation. It is stability, and stability is the foundation upon which sovereignty is built. Laying down the sword, therefore, is not weakness. It is promotion. In war, the sword is essential. It represents vigilance, readiness, and defense. But in governance, the sword becomes secondary. A ruler may possess strength, but does not constantly brandish it. Authority in peacetime is expressed through wisdom structure, and stewardship, not constant combat. When you cling to the sword in a season of stability, you communicate to your own nervous system that the war continues. You remain in reaction mode. You interpret neutral events as potential threats. You manage relationships defensively rather than collaboratively. You approach opportunity cautiously rather than creatively. This is not because you lack faith, but because your identity is still anchored in battle. Promotion requires posture change. It requires releasing tools that were appropriate for a previous assignment. Imagine a soldier who refuses to remove armor long after the battlefield has cleared. The armor, once protective, becomes heavy and unnecessary. It restricts movement. It signals threat where there is none. Similarly, hypervigilance becomes cumbersome in a promised land season. The promised land is not entered by force. It is inhabited by trust. This truth is illustrated profoundly in what can be called the David principle: war hands cannot build temples. David was a warrior king. He fought battles, defeated giants, expanded territory. His hands were accustomed to the sword. Yet when it came time to build the temple, a structure representing peace worship and legacy, he was told that he would not construct it. The reasoning was not condemnation, but alignment. The temple required a different posture. It required hands shaped by stability rather than conflict. Solomon, whose reign was marked by relative peace, built what David could not. This principle is not about moral failure. It is about season appropriateness. The mindset that thrives in conflict does not always thrive in construction. If you attempt to build your new season while operating from survival reflexes, you will unknowingly sabotage it. Survival mindset sabotages promised land seasons because it assumes scarcity even in abundance. It prepares for betrayal even in healthy relationships. It anticipates collapse even during growth. It views opportunities as temporary loopholes rather than sustainable pathways. In survival mode, you hoard emotional energy. You keep exits in mind. You test loyalty repeatedly. You minimize joy to cushion potential loss. These behaviors once shielded you, now they undermine you. They prevent intimacy. They reduce collaboration. They limit expansion. The promised land is not maintained through suspicion. It is stewarded through wisdom. Wisdom is different from hypervigilance. Hypervigilance reacts quickly. Wisdom observes patiently. Hypervigilance anticipates worst-case scenarios. Wisdom evaluates evidence. Hypervigilance isolates to protect. Wisdom connects with discernment. The upgrade from fighter to ruler is therefore internal before it is external. It begins with acknowledging that your current tension may not be necessary. It continues with choosing responses that reflect stability rather than fear. When someone offers partnership, you do not immediately search for hidden agendas. When good news arrives, you do not automatically anticipate reversal. When peace settles, you do not interpret it as a prelude to attack. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires intentional practice. Each time anxiety urges you to grip the sword again, you pause. You breathe. You remind yourself that the season has changed. You ask whether your reaction is based on present evidence or past memory. In doing so, you retrain your posture, Upgrading posture from fighter to ruler is not about abandoning strength. It is about expressing strength differently. A fighter demonstrates strength through endurance. A ruler demonstrates strength through composure. A fighter survives chaos. A ruler establishes order. A fighter prepares for battle. A ruler prepares for legacy. Legacy requires long-term thinking. It requires stability. It requires openness to collaboration and creativity. You cannot design a temple while scanning for enemies at every corner. You cannot cultivate generational impact while bracing for collapse. The shift from warrior to sovereign is therefore a shift from reaction to intentional governance. It is the realization that your worth is not tied to how much you endure, but to how wisely you steward what you have endured. The battle season built your resilience. The peace season will reveal your maturity. Maturity is measured not by how fiercely you can fight, but by how calmly you can lead. Calm leadership does not deny past pain. It integrates it. It does not forget the wilderness. It honors it without reliving it. You are not discarding your warrior identity. You are transcending it. The warrior remains within you as capacity, but no longer as constant posture. You can fight if required, but you are no longer required to fight constantly. This distinction is crucial. It frees you to inhabit stability without feeling complacent. It allows you to enjoy blessing without suspicion. It empowers you to build without bracing. And as you consciously release survival reflexes, you will notice that your decisions become less reactive and more visionary. Vision is a sovereign trait. It looks beyond immediate threat and sees long-term possibility. When you upgrade your posture, you begin asking different questions. Instead of asking, "How do I protect myself?" you ask, "How do I cultivate growth?" Instead of asking, "What could go wrong?" you ask, "What can be built?" Instead of asking, "Who might hurt me?" you ask, "Who can partner with me?" These questions reflect a mind that has shifted from scarcity to stewardship. This is the essence of the transition. The throne awaits, but it cannot be occupied with clenched fists. Open hands signify readiness to receive, to bless, to govern. The sword served you. It protected you. It helped you survive. Honor it for its season. Then place it down with gratitude, not fear. Because the one who led you through battle is the same one who calls you into governance. And governance requires confidence, not in constant defense, but in established authority. You are not losing your edge. You are refining it. You are not becoming weaker. You are becoming stable. And stability sustained over time is more powerful than any single victory on a battlefield. Now that you have begun the internal shift from warrior to sovereign, it is time to establish structure around that shift. Because identity transformation without protocol easily dissolves under pressure. And this is where the peacetime protocol becomes not just symbolic, but practical, a framework that protects your new season from the reflexes of the old one. Promotion without discipline collapses. Peace without structure drifts back into chaos. You have survived the wilderness, but now you must learn how to steward stability. The first pillar of this peacetime protocol is what can be called the 48-hour emotional veto for incoming blessings. When breakthrough finally arrives, when the email you prayed for lands in your inbox, when the financial door swings open, when a healthy relationship steps into your life, your nervous system may not immediately celebrate. It may panic. It may question legitimacy. It may search for flaws. Years of deferred hope have trained your brain to anticipate reversal. So instead of reacting instantly, whether through overexcitement or withdrawal, you institute a deliberate pause. For 48 hours, you do not make a reactive decision. You do not reject the opportunity in fear. You do not announce it impulsively in adrenaline. You allow your nervous system to acclimate. This pause is not hesitation rooted in doubt. It is stabilization rooted in wisdom. It gives your biology time to catch up with your blessing. During those 48 hours, you breathe deeply. You ground yourself. You remind your body that not every surge of adrenaline signals danger. You observe your internal dialogue without obeying it. You let the initial spike of fear or intensity settle. Often, what feels overwhelming on day 1 becomes manageable on day 2. The veto interrupts sabotage. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, sovereignty emerges. The second pillar deepens this transition through intentional visualization and declaration, because posture shifts not only through thought, but through embodied symbolism. In your mind, you must see what you are releasing. Close your internal eyes and picture the sword you carried through the wilderness. Feel its weight. Notice how tightly your fingers have gripped it. Acknowledge what it did for you. It defended you. It kept you alert. It helped you endure. Then consciously open your hands. Watch it fall. Hear it hit the ground. And say, even if only within yourself, I lay it down. This declaration is not theatrical. It is neurological. Words reinforce neural pathways. When you speak release, you create internal alignment with the season shift. Each time anxiety tempts you to pick the sword back up, you repeat the declaration. I lay it down. Not because you are careless, but because you trust that divine protection remains active without constant tension. Over time, that declaration becomes your new reflex. Instead of bracing you, release. Instead of gripping you, open. But even with these practices, the transition will not occur without resistance. There will be phantom attacks, subtle and strategic, attempting to lure you back into survival mode. The first phantom attack is guilt. When you finally experience uninterrupted joy, a whisper may rise saying you do not deserve this. It may suggest that others are still struggling and that your happiness is selfish. It may remind you of past mistakes, as though they disqualify you from peace. This is not humility. It is distortion. Guilt in this context is an attempt to anchor you in scarcity even when heaven has authorized abundance. True humility receives blessing with gratitude, not shame. If joy feels uncomfortable, pause and examine whether the discomfort is conviction or conditioning. Conviction leads to growth. Conditioning leads to self-punishment. The second phantom attack is paranoia. As new connections form and new opportunities unfold, your mind may begin scanning for hidden agendas. You may interpret kindness as manipulation. You may question motives without evidence. You may feel an urge to withdraw before you can be disappointed. This is trauma's echo, not intuition's clarity. Intuition is steady. It does not scream. It does not rush. It presents insight calmly and allows space for evaluation. Paranoia, by contrast, demands immediate retreat. It floods the body with urgency. When you feel that urgency, ask yourself whether it is grounded in present reality or past memory. Do not automatically obey it. Observe it. Breathe through it. Apply the 48-hour veto if necessary. The third phantom attack is sabotage. This one is subtle because it disguises itself as restlessness. When life becomes smooth, when conflict decreases, you may feel an inexplicable urge to disrupt it. You might pick unnecessary arguments. You might overanalyze harmless comments. You might procrastinate on opportunities that could expand your life. Why? Because chaos feels familiar. Stability feels unfamiliar. The body sometimes seeks what it recognizes, even if what it recognizes was painful. Sabotage recreates intensity so that you can feel in control of it. But control rooted in chaos is not sovereignty. It is repetition. Recognizing these three phantom attacks is essential because awareness dismantles their power. When guilt whispers, you respond with gratitude. When paranoia spikes, you respond with patience. When sabotage tempts, you respond with stillness. And this leads to another critical skill in peacetime governance: distinguishing trauma reactions from divine intuition. Trauma reactions are fast, urgent, and charged. They narrow your focus. They amplify threat. They demand immediate action. Divine intuition is calm, precise, and spacious. It may guide you away from something, but it does not do so through panic. It aligns with peace even when it prompts caution. If a decision feels rushed and fear-driven, it likely stems from conditioning. If a decision feels grounded and clear, even if it requires courage, it likely stems from discernment. Developing this distinction requires practice. You slow down your responses. You check your breathing. You notice whether your body feels constricted or open. You ask whether your thought pattern is repetitive and catastrophic or balanced and coherent. Over time, you will learn the texture of your own reactions. You will recognize when your nervous system is reacting to a shadow rather than a substance. And with that recognition comes authority. Practicing governance over reaction is the culmination of the peacetime protocol. Governance means you do not let every emotion dictate action. You acknowledge feelings without becoming ruled by them. You treat anxiety as information, not command. You treat joy as permission, not liability. You respond rather than react. This is the difference between a soldier and a sovereign. A soldier reacts to immediate threats. A sovereign evaluates before acting. A sovereign understands timing. A sovereign understands that not every internal surge requires external movement. Each time you pause before reacting, you reinforce your new identity. Each time you apply the 48-hour veto, you strengthen your capacity for stability. Each time you declare, "I lay it down," you retrain your nervous system to trust peace. And as these practices accumulate, something shifts quietly but powerfully. Peace stops feeling temporary. Blessings stop feeling suspicious. Silence stops feeling ominous. You begin inhabiting your new season with composure. The peacetime protocol is not about suppressing emotion. It is about stewarding it. It is about aligning your internal state with heaven's decree that the war has ended. You are no longer required to fight for survival. You are invited to govern your inheritance. Governance is steady. It is measured. It is patient. And it is strong in a way that does not need to prove itself constantly. You have the tools now. You have awareness. You have structure. And you have authority. The battlefield taught you resilience. The promised land will teach you restraint. And restraint, when rooted in trust, becomes the quiet power that sustains everything you have been praying for. And so we arrive at the moment that is not symbolic but decisive, not emotional but governmental, the official discharge and commissioning that marks the true end of your wilderness assignment and the beginning of your governed season. This is not merely encouragement. This is formal spiritual discharge from the army of suffering. You have served in the trenches of endurance. You have stood watch in nights that felt endless. You have carried burdens that were invisible to others, but known intimately by heaven. You were not dismissed prematurely. You were refined thoroughly. And now the decree stands: your active duty in the battlefield of prolonged hardship is complete. Discharge does not erase memory. It changes assignment. You are not being abandoned. You are being reassigned. The posture of constant defense is no longer required. The uniform of hypervigilance no longer fits this season. You are being released not because you failed, but because you passed. But before you step fully into governance, there must be a binding at the root of what once attempted to anchor you in survival. Guilt must be bound at its source. You are not unworthy of peace. You are not selfish for receiving blessing. The idea that joy must be rationed because others still struggle is distortion, not humility. Paranoia must be bound at its origin. Not every kindness conceals an agenda. Not every open door hides a trap. You are no longer required to assume betrayal as default. Self-sabotage must be uprooted at its core. You will not disrupt stability simply because chaos once felt familiar. You will not recreate conflict to feel control. These patterns served a season of defense. They do not belong in a season of inheritance. And so you declare with clarity that the hard season is legally, spiritually, and physically over. Legally, because heaven has closed the case. Spiritually, because the testing period has fulfilled its purpose. Physically, because your nervous system is being recalibrated to align with peace rather than threat. This declaration is not denial of past pain. It is recognition of present authority. The wilderness was real. The suffering was significant. But it was temporary, and temporary assignments do not define permanent identity. Now there is prophetic expectation of tangible manifestation. Not vague hope, but grounded anticipation. Doors that once resisted will open with less friction. Opportunities that once felt distant will approach naturally. Relationships rooted in health will replace connections rooted in trauma. This is not fantasy. It is alignment. When posture changes, perception shifts. When perception shifts, decisions improve. When decisions improve, outcomes transform. Manifestation often follows maturation, and you have matured. Yet even in this declaration, a question stands before you. Not as accusation, but as invitation. Will you lay down the sword and pick up the scepter? The sword represents reaction, defense, and constant readiness for conflict. The scepter represents governance, stability, and measured authority. You cannot carry both with equal intention. One posture must yield to the other. The sword kept you alive. The scepter will allow you to lead. The choice is not theoretical. It appears in daily responses. When anxiety rises, will you grip or release? When blessing arrives, will you doubt or receive? When calm settles, will you brace or breathe? The ultimate transition is sealed not by emotion, but by declaration. And so you say, whether aloud or within your spirit, I am ready. Ready not for another fight, but for stewardship. Ready not for survival, but for structure. Ready not to endure endlessly, but to govern wisely. That declaration is not small. It reverberates through your nervous system. It signals to your mind that the season has changed. It aligns your body with heaven's decree. And with that declaration, you are commissioned into harvest governance and authority. Harvest does not require frantic labor. It requires attentive stewardship. Governance does not require aggression. It requires composure. Authority does not require noise. It requires alignment. You step into this new assignment not as someone who forgot the wilderness, but as someone who transcended it. And now, before movement resumes, before decisions accelerate, before new doors swing wider, you seal the transition in intentional silence. Silence not as emptiness, but as acknowledgement. Silence as agreement. Silence as internal alignment. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let your nervous system register what your spirit already knows. The war has ended. The case is closed. The assignment has changed. And you are no longer fighting for survival. You are governing from stability.